So we were talking about your TED Talk and the limitations of 6-minute time slot.
Sure.
Uh, what you mentioned that there were aspects of the story that you had to leave out.
Well, I mean, they say you have 6 minutes and you cannot go over.
Hmm.
You can go under, but you cannot go over. And
Hmm.
what I and so what I tried to do in that 6 minutes was encapsulate a mission, an actual mission that I had flown in December of 1970, and where we took a significant amount of hits, and we had to put the helicopter down in a clearing near the pickup zone. But what I didn't get to share in that, had I had more time, was the fact that after we were picked up about an hour later and flown back to the home base, I got another helicopter um, and flew back out there to pick the guy back up because
He's still out there.
he's still out there. He's still injured. He still needs to be taken to a medical facility. And so my co-pilot chose not to go back with me. And, he had his reasons and that's okay.
So does
So
that mean you go without a co-pilot or you find a
no, no,
different
no.
co-pilot?
I just got someone else to go with me.
Yeah.
We didn't do any solo pilot missions out there. So I got another co-pilot and we went back out and no further incident, but we were able to hoist the guy out and take him on to a medical facility where he had the treatment he needed.
Wow. So how much time do you think elapsed between your aborted attempt and the successful attempt?
Well, probably at least um, 2 hours.
Wow. I
Um,
I can't imagine what that 2 hours was like for him.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons we took 25 hits in the helicopter, at least that's what we counted. One of the rounds that came through the helicopter came through the instrument panel on the helicopter and came and stopped inside the one of the instrument glasses. In fact, shattered the glass. Had the bullet had any more velocity, it would have hit him in the head and would have killed him, the co-pilot. So realizing that, he was pretty shook up and he decided not to go back. He needed to take a short break.
Yeah.
So, and that's the reason he didn't go back.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's back up a little bit and talk
Okay,
about your entry into the world of aviation and military aviation specifically.
sure.
I know you spent some time at VMI, you told me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I was had gone after high school. VMI had turned me down for my application. It was the only college that I applied to. So my parents elected to send me on to a military prep school, which had a postgraduate program for high school to bring the GPA back up and so forth. And so really that was my first indoctrination into the military. This was Hargrave Military Academy in Chatham, Virginia. And so I got into the military discipline and that really I enjoyed that military discipline even though we didn't grow up in a military house when I was as a child. And so when it came up to time to apply for colleges, I reapplied to Virginia Military Institute and also VPI, Virginia Polytechnic Institute.
Mhm.
And VMI took pity on me and admitted me into the class. And so that, of course, that was even more strict discipline than Hargrave Military Academy. There's no comparison. And so I was there for about a year and a half. I had to do summer school because the academics were not so good. And so I was there almost continuously from August or late August, early September of 1967 throughout until the time I left, which was in February of 1969. So
So
that was,
you left there having graduated or you
oh,
didn't
no,
you
no, no, no,
yeah.
no, no. No, I was still doing poorly academically, though I thrived on the military lifestyle and the discipline and the drill and ceremonies and that sort of thing. The academics are we call them freshmen are called rats. So in my rat year, I was carrying 18 semester hours and all the military parts of that.
Mm,
So I was in the band, and so we had band practice and we had band and parades and all of that stuff, plus 18 hours of semester hours of academics. It was just, I just wasn't accustomed to that. And so I got to a point there that I could tell that the Vietnam War was going on, and I would periodically see the news and see the helicopters. And I don't know how I caught wind that there was a program called High School to Flight School, where the high school graduate could, if they could pass a flight aptitude test and a flight physical, could be brought into the Army to go to flight school and fly helicopters.
mm.
I don't know how I learned of that. Regardless, that really intrigued me because I knew that I was going to be at VMI for a very long period of time before I graduated. And so I thought, well, this was an opportunity. This is something that was of great interest for me. And so I went ahead and elected to leave the school and go into this high school to flight school program.
Well, I guess I have two questions about that. One is, looking back on it now with the benefit of, decades of hindsight, do you find it odd that they would, I mean, it strikes me as a little surprising that they would take a kid right out of high school and teach him how to fly a helicopter.
Well, you have to think about during the Vietnam War, the helicopter crews, I mean, the attrition rate was so high. So when I finished flight school, which we haven't got to yet,
Mm.
we were graduating 500 aviators a month at Fort Rucker. And 95% of them were going to Vietnam. So there was a huge need for helicopter pilots, just not Dustoff pilots, but all the other kind of pilots that were needed, and Cobra pilots and gunship pilots and Loach pilots and so forth, that they needed a bunch of them. So we were graduating 250 warrant officers and 250 commissioned officers each month to go to Vietnam. So there was a big need at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And my second question is, what do you think it was about becoming an aviator that really appealed to you?
I don't know. It just looked like it'd be a lot of fun to go because I didn't have any aviation background. My family didn't have any aviation background, so it was just something that I thought it looked like it would be a lot of fun to do. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'll give it a
Mm.
shot.
Hmm. So tell me about flight school.
Well, flight school, well, of course, we initially go to Fort Polk, Louisiana for basic training. And all of the flight school candidates go through Fort Polk and to go through basic. And after basic, we were then brought out here to Mineral Wells, Texas, which is about 40 miles from west of me right now, to the U.S. Army Primary Helicopter Training Center. And we learned to fly these little mosquito, some people call them little mosquitoes. It was a two-seat, little tiny little helicopter, and we learned how to fly that. That was so the initial flight school was 5 months long. And so I was here from June until just after Thanksgiving, just in sometime in early December. And then I was able to take a Christmas break before reporting to Fort Rucker, now Fort Novosel, uh, Alabama, for the next level or the next 4 months of training, learning to fly Huey and getting some instrument training and that sort of thing. So it was a 9 month process. So in my case, 10 months with the Christmas vacations type thing in the middle.
Mm. So forgive me, what year are we talking about now?
I started in 1969 in flight school here at Fort Walters. And then I graduated in May 1st or May 5th of 1970.
Mhm.
But the funny thing, there at and I'll get this into the story as we progress, but my last 4 weeks of training at Fort Rucker, uh, I was selected to go on to gunship training. So I got to take a Huey. It had 2.75-inch rockets and or twin miniguns or 40 millimeter grenade launcher, and I got to go blow things up on the ranges in lower Alabama. I mean, it was just a blast to go be able to go do that. I mean, it was just fun. So I got 4 weeks of that toward the end of my flight school. So I thought that, because I knew that I was going to be going to Vietnam, and I just thought, well, if I could be a gunship guy, I mean, that would be a blast. I mean, flying helicopters is great, but flying helicopters with guns, I mean, what a neat thing that would be.
Mhm. And the irony,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah, that it didn't go as planned. Let me just say that.
Okay, so how does a bandsman with an appetite for uh demolition for blowing things up end up flying dust off
Well,
missions?
we get to Vietnam. We land in Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base just outside of Saigon, and we're bussed over to the 21st Replacement Battalion. And this is where you get a little bit of indoctrination. They give you some supplies and that kind of thing. And this is, uh, this is how you get around. This is whatever. I don't even remember all that we did. And so I came up to the time where they were going to give me my assignments, and they came up to me and said, "Mr. Petersen, you're going to be a Dustoff pilot." And I said, "Oh, time out. No, I'm a gunship guy." And they go, "Mr. Petersen, no, you're not. You're a dust-off guy." And so I, right across I mean, not 200 yards away was the 45th Med Company. And I was being assigned to the 45th Med Company.
Hmm.
And, and today, obviously, and even then, uh, I can see how much more rewarding that mission was in comparison to being a gunship guy. The guns were fun, but Dustoff had a true purpose and a true meaning, which I totally appreciate more today than ever.
Mm. Sorry, did you say what month it was that you arrived in Vietnam?
That was in June of 1970. Early.
And first impressions?
It was hot and stinky. There is a smell of that country that won't leave you, and the humidity is tremendous. And so because we were down south, it was a town toward we're north of the Mekong Delta, so it was, a lot of water, and so the humidity was just great. So as you walked off the airplane, that just smacks you square in the face. It was just, but there was a unique smell to Vietnam, and there's a number of reasons for that, I'm sure, but
Mm.
that was and then getting on a bus and being bussed over to the 21st Replacement Battalion.
Hmm.
Just to see this country, which you are totally unfamiliar with. I mean, because I was an East Coast guy, and I'm not familiar with this kind of territory or terrain, and all these little scooters and motorcycles and things just buzzing all around was just kind of an eye opener.
Mm. So you had some time, I guess, to get used to the idea that you were not going to be a gunship pilot?
Well, I didn't have much time because as soon as they told me I was going to be a dust-off pilot, they put me in a vehicle and uh, brought me over to the 45th. Like I said, it was only 200 yards away. In fact, the flight path for the landing pads where it flew directly over the 21st Replacement Battalion. So I saw these guys flying in and out all the time. So really, I didn't have to go very far. I didn't have to, it wasn't a long trip to get over to my new assignment and
So
then get in.
once you're in that company, once you're not, I don't mean company in terms of like an army unit. I mean just in the company of men who are doing this day and night. What are your impressions of them?
You know, I don't recall really what that was. Just a bunch of other. Of course, the warrant officers have a tendency to stick together. We didn't really relate well to we call them RLOs, real life officers. So the commissioned officers, we didn't relate so well to them. So we hung around with warrant officers, and we just kind of wrapped our arms around each other, and not literally, but that we would take care of each other
Mhm.
as we came in. So I believe that's the way I felt when I first, I came over, and the group of people that I was going to be working with. So it
So
was.
was there a short timer who kind of took you under his wing, no pun intended, and you know taught you all the stuff that they didn't teach you?
I'm sure that there was, but I don't remember exactly who that may have been.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm sure we just kind of hung together. Uh, I got a room and then a roommate. His name was Jerry Ham. So he and I took this hooch. We call it a hooch. We got our hooch and started working on it to make it livable. And we had a bunk bed type thing. And then, so we had to build everything out. So we had to scrounge up an air conditioner because they weren't air conditioned and things like that. Just so you can't you just can't go down to Lowe's and pick up a window air conditioner. They just don't have a Lowe's available there. So you had to have something of value to trade. And so if you had something of value and somebody else had an extra air conditioner, and then you can make some sort of agreement, then you could trade. And so I don't remember what we traded collectively between Jerry and I, but we got an air conditioner, which, is critically essential in Vietnam, especially, well, it's always hot. At least it was always hot where I was. And so it was just running continuously. So you just needed that. So whatever it took, you had to have that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my impression is, and correct me if I'm misinformed, but in the rare occasions where you guys had a chance to get some sleep, you had to sleep pretty fast, and it's hard to do that when it's 100 degrees inside the hooch.
Exactly, it is.
Yeah. So how long is it before you get your first taste of mission?
Well, pretty soon because you get an indoctrination ride, helicopter rides with an instructor. So one of the instructors in there that's been there for a while, he'll take you around and it's more of an admin flight so that you can, get used to. You're given a set of maps that you have to put together because there are like 5 maps, 4 or 5 maps that you have to scotch tape. And then I also laminated those so I could write on them, and I still have that map today.
Mm,
Um, and so you just kind of doing those things, and you just start to learn the AO, the area of operation. You got to learn the traffic pattern of where we were. We were in Long Binh, which was about 20 miles west, or I mean east of Saigon. And so you got those couple. Then after you finish your orientation type thing, you were put in the flights or schedule to start taking missions as a co-pilot. So you had an experienced aircraft commander who then you were the Peter pilot, and so you started going on missions pretty quick because they needed guys. In
yeah.
fact, the unit that at the 45th had taken some casualties, some losses just prior to me getting there. So they were still a little shorthanded, and so they really put you into the deal right away.
Forgive me if this is a sensitive question, but I wonder about the welcome you received because I've heard that when replacements arrive at a unit that just took heavy casualties, there can be a real interesting mix of thank God you're here and I resent you because my buddy is dead.
Right. Well, I don't recall any sense of that. It was, we need you. Let's get going. Let's get to work because we need to, because the mission continues. I mean, this is in 1970 and people think that, oh, the war is winding down in 1970. Well, not really. I mean, we were doing a lot of flying and a lot of missions. And so it really wasn't winding down at all. And so we were pretty busy. So
Well,
we
sure.
would,
I mean, even if, I mean, just for the sake of argument, even if uh, the United States' role in the war was winding down, you guys didn't just pick up
right,
U.S.
exactly,
military personnel. You picked up anybody
right.
who
Yes.
need, including
Yes.
enemy.
Including the enemy. And in fact, I do recall one mission where we did pick up a captured Viet Cong DC who had been wounded. Of course, he was captured and he was uh, detained, and we had people that are going with us. I mean, he just didn't climb on the helicopter by himself with us to go on to go back to a medical facility. So we did. He was accompanied by a couple of guys, but yeah, we did pick up the bad guys, and
Mhm.
that was okay. We needed to be treated, and so we took him to an American hospital
Right.
for
And
treatment.
civilians also.
We did some civilians, but they certainly didn't come to the military hospitals. We took them on to, it was, because the Vietnamese had their own medical facilities, and so we would know that uh, where to take those individuals. They typically did not go to the American hospital unless it was a specific injury where we were told to take them to the 24th Surgical Hospital or the 93rd Evac Hospital or something like that. But those hospitals were primarily for our Americans and NATO guys that well, not NATO, but allies.
Mhm. So you're flying missions as a Peter pilot. You're getting the lay of the land. You're probably learning all sorts of new ways to talk on the radio because those are changing constantly. Was there a point, Doug, at which you felt like something flipped and you were in the flow of that experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I don't recall when it happened because we're still talking 54 years ago.
Mm,
Um, but early in my time, I do remember getting the first time I was shot down. My TEDx talk is the second time I was shot down.
mm,
So the first time that I was shot down, I was co-pilot, Peter pilot. And things happened pretty quickly. The helicopter we didn't crash per se. We landed, but still it was unflyable at the moment. So we had certain things going on, but you're following those procedures that we had been trained. We need to do this. We need to take this radio with us so it doesn't get compromised. And so those kinds of things got the thing going pretty quick. But I would say 3 months into flying that I became an aircraft commander. I think I came pretty quick, 3 months, 4 months maybe.
wow.
And then that's when you get your own call sign. And so then I became Dustoff 3-4. That was my call sign until I left.
Dust off 3-4.
Yeah.
Um, this might seem like a kind of a silly question, but I interviewed I believe it was Michael Logan,
Mhm.
um, and he was explaining to me that crew chiefs were assigned to a specific aircraft
Okay.
and stayed with that aircraft. That implies to me that you were not, that
Right.
you might fly any particular aircraft at any given time. Are there any challenges associated with that?
No, not really. I mean, we flew whatever helicopter was up, it was in the sequence of, okay, we had 25 helicopters assigned to the company. And okay, these 12 are mission ready, so to speak. The other 12 or 13 are under maintenance, and these guys are working on their helicopters. And so while the crew chief may be, would be assigned to that particular helicopter for its maintenance, daily maintenance and monthly maintenance and hourly maintenance and that kind of thing, the medic, crew, co-pilot, and aircraft commander were just assigned, okay, you go grab a helicopter 427, and that is your helicopter for today. And so you would just go out there. Now the medic, I think they tried to keep it. We had 4 platoons, and they tried to keep the platoon medic with the crew chief. So, but that not necessarily. I mean, they were pretty flexible. So the medic and the crew chief worked very well together. So the crew chief would teach the medic some of the tools of, how do you help me maintain this helicopter, and then in return, the medic would teach the crew chief, okay, this is how, when I'm doing this, this is what I need you to do with the patient. So it was they cross-trained each other in a lot of that. Now, we as pilots up front, we didn't really have, we would work with both of them when we were at downtime period. We would go in and help do whatever. We're not really trained to do that kind of thing, but we would be there to help. But the pilots and the co-pilots were interchangeable for the most part. I was in my call sign being Dustoff 3-4 meant I was in the 3rd platoon. So I could be easily flying with a Dustoff 2-5, even though I was in the 3rd platoon. We weren't that rigid in the structure where we couldn't fly with another crew.
Yeah, well, you probably couldn't afford to be that rigid, right? I mean, it's a fluid situation.
Right.
So you're flying day and night?
Yeah, day, night, good weather, bad weather, didn't make any difference.
How many missions in a typical day, if there's such a thing as a typical day?
Well, we had the 45th had 4 standby locations. I mean, and then what we would do here, so we had at Long Bend, the company headquarters, we had a first up, which would be launched for the first mission. Then there was a second up, means that if first up was out doing missions and there was another mission that came in the area, that second up would be launched, and there was a big buzzer horn, and we would run and that kind of thing, alert horn. And then the third up would be the admin. So if they needed to make a blood run, meaning that we needed to fly into Saigon to pick up units of blood to bring back to one of the hospitals, it was an administrative type run. So we would do those out of Long Bend. So first up, second up, and third up. So there's 3 crews that were needed just for Long Bend. So we had a standby or remote sites. So one place was up in Tainan, and we would stay out there for 4 days at a time. And we would work that area of operation for 4 days. And then we would fly back and another crew would come out. There was Tainan, Tainan, Nui Dat, and Swan Lock. So there was 4 different remotes that we would go out, work the area of operation day and night. When we get the radio calls and get those missions, we would just go fly. And it, just didn't make any difference. Other than Swan Lock, there really wasn't any mountainous area that we flew in. I flew a lot of down in the Mekong Delta area. It was pretty flat, rice paddy type stuff. So I did a lot down in Tainan, but the accommodations down there were a lot different. So you can imagine if you were the best, there's something we would call a Connex container, which is about half the size of one of these big shipping containers that you see on the backs of trucks nowadays. So you put one of those in half, and that's a little Connex container. In Swan Lock, that's where we slept in. We slept in a Connex container. So it was pretty uncomfortable on a cot, and so it was pretty rough when we got out there. but we were doing so much flying at the time, there was really very little downtime when we were out there. So I recall when I was down in Tan An, uh, one particular time, I was a aircraft commander, and we were just flying continuously. And what we would do is, when we would get the mission on the radio, we would take a grease pencil and we would write the coordinates and the call sign and the frequency on the windscreen or the
Mm.
windshield
Mhm.
in grease pencil. And then, so we would load it up. And so we had 4 or 5 of these missions. Of course, we would take the urgent missions first, because they're obviously the urgent, the most critical.
Mhm.
And so we had urgent, critical, I can't remember the 2 other ones. There was
But
2
one of
other
them
ones.
was routine, I think.
Yeah, routine.
I can't remember the third one.
Yeah. But in any case, so we would write these on the windscreen, and we were just, I mean, we were just full screen. And so the Huey can only go for about 2 hours on fuel. And so we would come back to Tan An. Hot refuel means we don't shut the engine down. We just get the gas pump, fill it back up for another 2 hours worth, and go launch right back out. So this particular time, we were just in the air all the time, running 12 and 14 hours in the cockpit. And that's just brutal. So we had to call another ship to come down. And what we did is rotate out. So I would fly 12 or 14 hours, and I would come back to Tan An, and this other ship would pick up any of the missions that we hadn't done yet. They'd go out and fly 12 or 14 hours while we got some sleep and something to eat. And then we would rotate back out. We did that for 4 consecutive days. And I ended up with about 48 hours in 4 days. Now, we're only allowed
Flight hours, you mean?
in the cockpit.
Yeah.
So we're only allowed 100 hours in 30 days. So I've already used up half of my 30-day allotment in 4 days. And so they stand you down because you just can't crew rest. They tried to manage it, but not so much. You had missions, you had work, you had something to do. I mean, you just can't go up. I'm out of crew rest. I can't go fly. No, you go fly.
Yeah.
You worry about the rules later. The regulations went out the window when it came to the mission. We were just flying our missions, and we were just flying our asses off.
So, I mean, what is I mean, I'm assuming that there's some sort of like there's a flight surgeon or somebody who ultimately gets to decide whether you fly or not.
Well, there could have been one somewhere.
Okay, enough said. Um, I clearly have been misinformed. So, given the amount of aircraft that you had, given the amount of area that you had to cover, the amount of missions it was humanly possible to fly in one day, or technologically possible to fly in one day. I mean, do you feel like you guys covered it, or do you feel like you were still just stretched?
Well, I think we were stretched. I mean, it was, in some locations there wasn't a lot of activity, so you didn't get a lot of flying. Like down in Nui Dot, Nui Dot was the standby that a lot of the pilots liked because it was the Australian base,
Mhm.
and so this is where the Australians worked out of, and it was pretty nice. Where the lodgings were nice, and you had nice meals and that kind of thing, and you had some downtime. You weren't flying continuously. Swan Lock, which was out in the mountains and the thick jungles. Uh, that was pretty intense out that way. Tay Nan was near the Cambodian border, and so you had some of that kind of activity that was going on at that time over there. So uh, things just didn't slow down. It didn't seem like. I mean, there was some downtime. I mean, certainly when I had finished my 48 hours in those 4 days, I was, told to take some crew rest, and we had place called Long Tao, which is south of where we were, the Australians had a recreational center, and we would go down there for 3 days just to decompress, play putt golf, swim in the pool, surf in the South China Sea with the sharks, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Drink a lot of Australian beer and just kind of relax. But then, after 3 days, okay, come back and let's get her done. So we got work to do.
Mm. Well, I want to get into that. I want to get into the actual work. But before I do, one last question about preparation. Is there anything interesting in terms of ease or difficulty about making the transition from Peter pilot to aircraft commander?
Well, no, I don't, I don't remember any significant. You just know you're ready when you're ready, and
Okay.
I just knew I was ready to take on that role. It's certainly there's a lot of responsibilities with an aircraft commander. One, now you're responsible for the other three people on that helicopter, three members of that crew. You're responsible for them. You're responsible to accomplish the mission. You're the one that makes the call whether or not you go or don't go. You're the one that makes those decisions on how you're going to get in and how you're going to get out. And all of that um, can weigh heavy on a 21-year-old because that's what we were. Now
That's
I
I
was,
still have trouble wrapping my head around that.
yeah. Think of, I was one of the older guys. I was 22. And so you get these truly from high school to flight school guys, they're 20 years old, maybe 21. And it's that kind of responsibility as an aircraft commander is significant, but you're trained to do that. You're trained so that you are capable of doing that. And each of it, every aircraft commander out there that ever flew in one of these missions was, in my opinion, totally qualified to make those life and death calls. Like the time that I mentioned in the TEDx talk. The mission changed from the time once we started taking hits, and it was significant that the mission changed. The mission wasn't the guy on the ground anymore. The mission was to get my three other crew members to someplace safe so we could go back and live another day. That was the new mission. And it's an instantaneous change. It's not, well, we took some hits. Do you think we can? No, you have to make those quick calls, and that's the call that I made.
Mm. Well, can we talk a little bit about the work and,
Sure.
just some, I mean, what are some, I don't know, some of the more defining, what some of the missions that you recall that really defined your experience there?
Well, there are a number of missions that stand out. Certainly
I mean,
that
that's
one.
really saying something because you flew a ton of
Huh,
missions.
yeah. I flew almost 1,000 combat hours. So that's a lot in 11 months. I came home a little early, and there's a long story behind that. But anyway, let's talk about the missions themselves. Certainly, this one that the second time that I was shot down, it was a hoist mission where we were going out to pick up a critical soldier, an American soldier who was injured, and we had to do a hoist. The hoist is where we would lower a cable down into the jungle. They would open this jungle penetrator up. There's some folding seats. They would open up those seats, strap the patient on, and we would hoist them back up. We're sitting, and so after we'd gone out there, we have to clear our path with the artillery fire bases that were shooting artillery shells. We had to make sure we didn't fly in their firing line, so to speak. So we had to make those radio calls. We get out to there, and we're cruising at 2,000 feet because of that's the altitude we flew until we got onto the mission site because of small arms fire. So we flew that high so that the small arms fire was pretty ineffective.
Mhm.
We get over there, and I talked to the the guy on the ground, and he gives me the situation. No enemy contact, no enemy contact. And we have one injured, gunshot wound. Well, let me think. No enemy contact, and he's got a gunshot wound. So there's a little red flag there, by the way. So we said, okay. And so we tell him to pop smoke, and we identify where he is. So we look down on the terrain, and we're trying to pinpoint where he is. And now we're going to descend from our 2,000 feet to the top of the trees. And we do this extremely fast because we want to minimize that risk of that exposure.
Mhm.
So we get down on the ground, we get down on the treetops, and now we're hovering along to find where that smoke was. And so now we're looking from, instead of at 2,000 feet, we're looking at 10 feet or 5 feet. And we're trying to hover around and, sorry about that. Phone call. So we're having to hover around, and so we're looking for this guy, and I flew directly over this bad guy. And all he did is he just takes his AK-47 and he just empties a magazine as we flew over him. So I mean, it wasn't any long distance. I mean, we couldn't have been, he probably was 20 feet underneath us. So he just riddled this helicopter to pieces. And so then obviously the instruments in the cockpit and warning lights started coming on, and we had to exit the area. And of course, the guy on the ground agreed. He told us to get out of there. And that's when we went ahead and found a clearing before the engine quit. Because I'm pretty certain that the engine would have quit within probably 4 or 5 more minutes. It would have probably seized up because of the engine oil. It doesn't run well without oil, like any engine.
Right.
So, that, and then, as I've already mentioned, we went, waited. We had other helicopters circling around us pretty quick within 10 minutes after we touched down in this clearing. And as I said in my TED talk, that we didn't know if the good guys or the bad guys were in this clearing. I mean, we just didn't know, but there wasn't any choice in the matter because we had to land. There was no, well, let me go see if there's a nice place to land. We had to land, and that's what we did. But we had other helicopters flying around over us. We had some gunships in the area. Then there's some Army, our guys with some APCs, armored personnel carriers, started surrounding us, and so we felt relatively secure where we were. So we just got out and started counting bullet holes on how many we had taken. And as I mentioned, I think we estimated about 25. And then another one of our unit came out and picked us up and took us back to the home base. So that was one. That's one of the.
That's the story that you told at the beginning of the call, where you basically got into another bird and you got a different co-pilot and headed right back out.
Yeah, and we finished that mission, and there's a funny side story to that whole thing. But and if we have time, I'll get into it. But
we have time.
But let's talk about missions.
Okay. All right.
So one of the other, hoist missions were 7 or 8 times more dangerous than any other mission we did. Primarily because you're just sitting there above the trees or above the jungle, and you're a sitting duck. And if you have a patient on board, patient on the jungle penetrator, and you're trying to bring up, and you start taking enemy fire, what are you going to do? Well, you can't drag him through the jungle. You can't leave because you're going to drag him through the jungle, probably killing him. You can't get him up any faster than what you're already doing. And so you just sit there and hopefully you get them up to the helicopters in time so that you can exit away. And I've had a couple of those times, and there's one that stands out too, that I was doing another hoist mission. I did 25 hoist missions while I was there, and that is a lot. And that's probably anyway. That's a bunch. I was doing one hoist mission, and as I was bringing the guy up, the enemy was shooting him, and we could tell he was taking additional hits as he was coming up on the jungle penetrator, and that's just heartbreaking to and there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
But we got him, and we got him on board, and we got him to a hospital. But those are the things that that's 55 years ago,
Yeah.
almost 55 years ago. And one of the other hoist missions I did, we had priorities. A priority one was US, and priority two was our allies. But there was a priority 1A. When I give my classes to the schools and such, I ask them, do you have any idea what a 1A priority is? And nobody guesses. And what it is a scout dog. The scout dogs played a huge role in the patrols that were out on the ground. Not only did they search out the enemy, they had all sorts of missions, and this dog was injured and needed to be treated. And so I had a hoist mission to hoist out a scout dog. And so we had the handler was on the jungle penetrator, and his arms were wrapped around his scout dog in order to get him up. And so we got him up and took him on to the hospital, and he got some veterinary care for his gunshot wounds that he had suffered from.
Mm.
So those, and that one other hoist mission that I'll mention is night hoist missions are extremely frightening. I mean, probably that's the most scared that I could remember.
Yeah, those
Because
bad guys were good at shooting at sounds.
sounds, so we turned all our lights off. And so now you're trying to hover above the jungle with no lights on. And when you got to find the guy first, where he is, where is he in this dark black jungle? And how are you going to hover? So I had this light ship that was with us on station, and he had this big xenon light that he could shine anywhere. So I said, well, there is no SOP. There's no standing operating procedure to do these things that we did. We just did them. We did them by experience and trial and error. And anyway, so I told the guy, I said, okay, shine the light on me so I can see where I am. Well, when he did that, there is up above the pilot's head is a green plexiglass. So when he shone that light through the helicopter, the entire cockpit went green. And as I'm screaming to him on the radio, turn the light out, turn the light out. So he turns the light out. And then I said, okay, now what am I going to try to do? So then I had him focus the light about 200 meters in front of me, and so I could have some visualization and movement if I was moving. Plus, the crew chief and medic were telling me shift right, turn, go left, whatever.
Now,
So
how do they know?
well, they could see a little bit of the ground when you're down low like that, 10 or 15, 5 or 10 feet. They can see the jungle, so they can tell you to shift right. And plus, the guy on the ground has got a flashlight or something,
Mm.
so they can see some of that, so they can give me directions. But those are probably the most scary. I only did 2 night hoist missions, and just those were crazy.
So I'm trying to picture these aircraft. You mentioned earlier the Mosquito. That's the one with the kind of bubble shaped cockpit, and you can see down through your feet at the ground. But in a Huey, can you see?
Yeah, you can see, especially on the left seat side, your visual. The control panel, the instrument panel, does not go all the way over to the left side.
Mm.
So typically the aircraft commander flew on the left side.
Mm,
even though technically that's a co-pilot's seat. The pilot seat in a helicopter is the right seat
mm,
because the instrumentation is all structured around the right seat.
mm,
For visibility, we would fly in the left seat for the aircraft commander. At least that was my choice. And most of the other guys did the same thing. They flew in the left seat. So you could see through the chin bubble. There was a chin bubble where you could see some of the vegetation and so forth easier than you could from the right seat. The right seat, you didn't have that kind of visibility through the chin bubble, even though it was there. The instrument panel covered the majority of it. So the visibility on the left side was better.
mm, mm. Um, so when you're doing one of these hoist missions and you're hovering, right? You're a sitting duck.
Right.
Do you have gunships circling and laying down covering fire typically, or?
The SOP said we were to have gunships um, when we were doing hoist missions. As I mentioned previously,
Throw it out the window?
out the window because you call for gunships, and they said, okay, we're 45 minutes away. I don't have 45 minutes. I got to get the guy now. I'm on site in 10 minutes. I'm not going to wait another 35 minutes to hoist a guy out or waiting on a gunship to arrive. And so I would say a good number of my hoist missions were without gunships. Now, they didn't lay suppressive fire down unless you started taking fire
Mm.
and where they could see where the bad guys were.
Yeah, I would imagine just their presence was some kind of deterrent.
Yeah, and we had some gunships around on some of my hoist missions, but we got to the point where we knew it was going to be a long time for them to get there. So we sometimes we just didn't call. We just go out and do it. You just go fly out there and take care of the mission. There wasn't anything, there was a thing called the golden hour, and I don't know if that's been mentioned already. If we could pick up from the time of injury to the time of medical facility was an hour, we had like a 95% survival rate. And so if I had to wait 45 minutes for gunships, I've killed the golden hour.
Yeah, I've heard that estimate as high as 97.
And I'm not going to argue that.
Well, I mean,
But certainly the success rate was extremely high in that golden hour. So we just couldn't sit around and do circle donuts in the sky waiting on somebody else to show up. We just went ahead and just did the missions. And if they showed up later, then we'd call them and say, hey, thanks. We're already done. We're on the way back. So
I've heard, and I don't have this is unconfirmed, but I've heard from a few different people that there were medevac units that are medevac aircraft that were armed, and the two examples that I recall were the first Cav and the 101st Airborne. So I don't know if that is true, but if it is true, how would that have changed the game for you, if at all?
well, the medevac, which is the call sign for the medical evacuation for the first Cav,
Hmm.
primarily, had more than a medical evacuation mission. So they were on other missions other than strictly medevac or
Mm,
Dustoff. I mean,
mhm,
medical evacuation. So they had some, and they were only under their division rules and SOPs and such. We totally complied with the Geneva Convention in that the only weapons that we were permitted to have are for patients' protection. So I carried a 38, 4-inch barrel. The crew chief and the medic typically had an M16 in the back, plus perhaps a handgun. And we were not really permitted to engage the enemy in an offensive manner. it was strictly defensive. So, and you think about it, so we've picked up these injured. We don't have time to sit there and engage the enemy with patients on board. Our job is to, one, get them to a medical facility as quickly as we could. And the medic and the crew chief were trying to conduct first aid the best they could. And we don't have a door gunner or anybody else to shoot. So it really, in my opinion, the Dustoff, which was uh, strictly for medical evacuation, 100%, were the unarmed, if with no engagement, offensive engagement with the enemy. Now the medevac guys had different roles, and so they had their Hueys were equipped with M60 machine guns, and they have had a door gunner assigned to it, so where they could have some suppressive fire if they were. But I think they had more than a medical evacuation mission.
Got it. So because they had a broader mission, they were equipped accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'd like to talk about um, the end of your tour and coming home and all that. But before we do that, is there anything else you want to say about missions? Any other stories you want to tell?
Well, there was one other mission, and it's funny how you can remember who the aircraft commander was. His name was Jim Ritchie. He was an RLO. And so Jim Ritchie and I were flying down south and out of Tanana. It was a night mission, and we had to go into this little fire support base and to pick up these the injured that they had in some engagement. So it was a relatively hot area. In other words, the enemy was active, so to speak. And I can remember, so we got down in the area, and this compound that we were going to be flying into was really, really small. And and we were typically a small arms fire where they had tracer rounds, and they were usually red. Means there was this, like an M16 or an AK-47, red tracer rounds. But when you got green tracers, they're either 50 or 51 cal. That's a big gun to be shooting at you. And I can remember going into this fire support base and seeing green tracers coming at us. And of course, we have all our lights off. We don't have any lights on. So they're shooting at noise, so to speak. So we landed into this compound. We got the injured guy, took off, and took him to the medical place. And then during the day, the next day or a day after that, we were called back to come pick up somebody else. And as we were coming in to land at this fire support base, I'm looking around and I said, how in the hell did we get in here at night? Because it was so compact that I don't even remember how we got in and got out of there. I mean, it was with the antennas and the buildings and tents and so forth. It was just really crazy. The things that you can do, and then you come back around and you go, holy crap, how did I do that?
Well, so that's a very good segue because, it's a very specific example, but just more broadly, once you got out of there, remind me to come back to that because I think we're about to go down another avenue here. But before we do that, uh, I have talked to some guys whose daily experience because of, the job that they had or the unit that they were assigned to or whatever, uh, as their time drew shorter, their daily experience changed in some way. They weren't put in as much risk as before, or they might have been transferred to some other, kind of rear position. Um, as your time drew short, did anything change for you?
Well, I was kind of in a unique situation. Uh, the 45th was going to stand down, means that it was going to be taken back to the US. The unit admin type the flags of the unit would be decommissioned in Vietnam and sent back, and a detachment, a smaller type unit, was going to be brought in to replace it. So take over the helicopters and the buildings and so forth. So there was this transition from the 45th Med Company over to, and I don't remember the unit, but anyway, to a detachment. Well, I was coming up on about 6 weeks, 7 weeks before I was supposed to DROS. And they just said, well, we're not going to assign you to the new unit. So when we decommission the 45th, you can't fly anymore. And that's kind of disheartening, because I really liked what I was doing. And in retrospect, I could look at it as, what if I had agreed to stay another 6 months? I could have joined that unit and been part of that detachment and continue the mission, but that didn't happen, so I can't. So during this downtime, we were given various administrative duties to kill time with, so go investigate this and go over here and do that. You're just whatever the case may be. So there was some downtime to decompress and not fly anymore. And I look back at it now, and I wish I had made different decisions regarding that, but I didn't, and I'm here today. So
Yeah. Yeah.
with those decisions, but so I got to come home earlier than my 12 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I got about a 6-week drop.
So you said there was a mission, you flew it at night, and then the next day you saw the place in the daylight and thought to yourself, holy cow, how did we manage that? Right. If you take that notion and zoom out and look at your full 11 months, have you ever had that moment where you look at the entire 11 months and say, holy cow, how did I do that?
Well, I think they're down into these individual missions that we tend to focus on and kind of remember the most. But we estimate and that collectively, we evacuated 900,000 patients, and I know you've heard that statistic already. And when I give my presentations, I'm going off a little bit from what you're asking, but the 900,000 is a huge number because there was only 1,400 pilots and 2,000 crew chiefs and medics during the 11-year war. So it's only 3,400 impacted the 900,000, which seems huge.
Well, it's even
Well,
bigger when you consider that, in the course of the war, I've heard estimates from 2.5 million to 3 million people served in Vietnam during the conflict. So 900,000 is, at least a third of the people who served. And 1,400 people took care of a third.
1,400 pilots, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, pilots, sorry. Yeah.
But let's take a look at that. So that 900,000 is huge. But take the one guy out of that 900,000, he got to come home because of what we did. He had a family who had a family. And so the impact of the 3,400 is not just 900,000, it's multi-millions, because had that guy not come back, that family wouldn't exist. And so the impact is much, and it's international because as we've already talked about, we didn't just do Americans, we did South Koreans, we did Australians, we did New Zealanders, we did so many different groups that lives were saved and families were created.
Hmm.
And we're kind of coining that thing, the gift of life. So the gift of life of these 900,000 is huge.
Well, I would imagine, and we'll talk more about your coming home experience, but whether you stayed in the military or not, if you were in any way connected to the military community, even just bumping into someone in the grocery store, the post office. You not only are a stand-in for all of the Dustoff pilots, you're a stand-in for every Dustoff crew member. You're a stand-in for every person who was on those missions. I would imagine that you have gotten some pretty emotional responses from people when they find out what you did.
Yeah, I do, and I certainly appreciate their thoughts and well wishes and what they share with me. But the other thing that I have to give credit to is my job was to get them from point A to point B. The guy in the back, that medic, is the guy that saved his life.
Right.
The medic is back there is the Michael Logan that you spoke with that got back there and started an IV in at night in a bouncing helicopter.
While taking fire.
Yeah. I mean, that's those. So it's the crew collectively. It's just not a pilot. And I
Right.
share that with people that come to me. So you're a hero. I am not a hero. The guy in the back who saved that guy's life with a tourniquet or a bandage or whatever from bleeding to death. That's the guy that is the hero.
Yeah, I totally respect that point of view, but I think that's an awfully tight focus, right? When you're bringing it down to the individual level, because the guy on the ground, he just hears the chopper,
Yeah.
right? So if you were on that chopper, you are his hero.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah. We're a crew collectively.
Yeah.
We're a unit. One unit is the crew of four, and we
Hmm.
work together the best and we did what we did.
Yeah. So when I said, all that bit about how you're a representative or a stand-in for every member of a dust-off crew, I would imagine you've had veterans come up to you, and even though you're probably not the guy who pulled them out, somebody like you did, and so you become the recipient of that gratitude.
And I belong to a nonprofit group here that we have. It's called Roll Call, and we have lunch for veterans. We are every month, once a month, and we have 400 to 450 veterans for lunch. And there are guys, and I've given my presentation to that group probably about 2 years ago now. And several have come up and said that they were Vietnam veterans have come up and said that they were picked up by a dust-off guy and taken to a hospital. So they are one of the 900,000. And it's good to hear their stories. And they come up and being quite, just like you said, I'm the guy, I'm the face in front of them today, though I wasn't the guy that was driving the helicopter for them necessarily. So yeah, it's pretty impactful.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said, the 900,000, each of them, most perhaps, went on to have families who had families who had families. So the impact is just exponential. And I'm assuming that a lot of that math is an important part of the effort to get a congressional gold medal.
Yeah, I would, when we go and, I've been twice now to talk to congressional staffers and senators and congressmen. And we're going again in June to go back and that's the point that I bring is the statistic of the 900,000 is an impressive number, but it's that gift of life that I really want the focus to be on.
Mm,
And the gift of the crew as a crew and not any one particular individual.
mhm,
You know, of the 3,400, we estimate there's only around 800 left. And one is because, the attrition rate during the war was about, we were a 1 in 3 chance of getting wounded or killed on each mission we flew. There was 33% casualty rate. So there was a 1 in 3 chance that we would be injured or killed on any particular mission. So our casualty rate was extremely high. And so, and of course, we're getting up in age too. And by whatever diseases that may have been contracted, the Dustoff crews are now down to, we estimate to be somewhere around 800, maybe 850 people that were there doing that job, which is pretty low in comparison. So that's why we think that it's so important that we get and promote and push and prod our legislators to pass this bill. There's no money associated with this bill. The money associated with it has already been allocated by the Mint. They already have the money to do what they have to do. So there's no budgetary committees that have to be blessed or anything of that sort. So why in the world wouldn't the congressman or congresswoman sign on to be a co-sponsor on the bill? I just don't grasp why they're not joining it. I think it's because they're not aware of it. And that's what we're there for, is to make them aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So have you always been involved since you got home over the last, 40 plus years? Have you always been involved with the community in some way?
Not to the extent that I am today. Um,
What
you know,
triggered it?
pardon me?
What triggered it? What changed that made you get
Oh,
more involved?
gosh, I don't know. I started when I retired from the corporate world. I did 20 years in the Army, and that was nice. And then I went into the financial services industry, and I worked 25 years there. Uh, and we were working primarily with military, so I had still had the exposure of military personnel and people. So I still had my foot in that arena, so to speak. And then when we got out and retired from that 10 years ago, then I started working with some nonprofits that were veterans focused. And then I began to find opportunities to share my story. I found an opportunity to share that TEDx talk and so forth, which I use extensively. And so it's just gone, and I think I'm just a lot more comfortable now sharing a lot of that stuff. And in fact, one of them, when I was speaking at a middle school several years ago, and the students are told in advance, okay, this was on Veterans Day, and so we had a bunch of veterans, and we were there all day, and so these classes come rotating through, and so the students are told that you can't ask these veterans certain questions, like, did you kill anybody? Right? You can't ask them that question. So I'd gone through my presentation, and this middle schooler, so she's in about the 6th or 7th grade. She says, "What was it like when you came home?" And no one has ever asked me that. And I took a minute. I said, "It's not right for an American to spit on another American." And I started to cry. Well, then she started to cry because she thought, here she is. She's making this old man cry, and now she's upset because she's made me upset. And I told her, I reassured her that she asked an excellent question, and that she should not be ashamed of that. And I made sure, I went back to the teacher later and I said, please make sure she understands she did nothing wrong. It was just, and still is, sensitive. And so I share that piece of story too periodically in my presentations. It depends on the presentation and who I'm speaking with and so forth.
I have to say, the reason I didn't go there is because you told me that you spent 20 years in the military. And most of the guys I talked to who had a really hard time coming home were the ones who came home and became civilians right away. And most of the guys I talked to who came home and stayed in the military, the transition was just not as abrupt, as traumatic for them. So that's the only reason I didn't ask you that. Did you have a hard experience coming home?
I don't think I had a hard experience. It's just shocking to know that when you get on the airplane to come home, you were told on the airplane to get out of your uniform as quickly as you could and get into civilian clothes. That's sad.
Yeah.
But, I think that the career military that transitioned from there to there still had the camaraderie and the brotherhood that we could rely on each other. I continued to fly Dustoff in my next assignment in the States. And so I still had the same mission, except for I wasn't getting shot at.
Mm.
I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was picking up paratroopers that were jumping out of an airplane and that broke their leg, broke their back, or whatever. So the mission was the same but different.
Hmm.
But I think the camaraderie and the brotherhood for that transition is easier because you still had somebody. You had your battle buddy. We didn't call them that at the time because we didn't have that term, but that's really what it was. It was your battle buddy was there to get you through any rough times if you had them.
Mm. Well, Doug, what have we not talked about that you think is important?
I think we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in a very short time. You're really good at this.
Well, thank you. So it was an experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. People ask me, do I want to go back to Vietnam? And I said, no, it's not the same country. Um, it's a communist country. I have no desire to go back. I didn't leave anything that I need to go back for. And, there's just no reason
Yeah.
and no desire.
So
I mean,
last question for you. And of course, if there's anything else you want to add, yeah, be my guest. I'm not trying to cut you off, but
right.
I wonder, I mean, just given the nature of your work, are there any, I'm assuming you've been to the wall.
Yes.
Are there any specific names that you look up
Yes.
when you're there?
Yes. There are two classmates, flight school classmates of mine, that didn't come home the way I did. One was named Edgar Franklin Krauss Jr. He was killed in July of 1970. He was flying a low observation helicopter, engaging the enemy, crashed, exploded, and burned and killed him and his co-pilot, Mark Webb. The other name that I go to is Paul Robert Brass, was killed flying a Dustoff mission in extremely bad weather at night, crashed into the side of a mountain. Those are the two guys that I go to and when I go to the wall.
What do you remember about those guys, Kraus and Brass?
Kraus and I were at Fort Polk together. So I have some memories of he and I together there at Fort Polk. And then we were in the same flight school class. So we were there together learning to fly that tiny little mosquito looking thing. And so we just had those good times back and then. And I have a picture of our flight school class and, they are there. And so those are the people uh, that I remember.
Were you in Vietnam when you got the news about these guys?
No, no, I didn't even learn about them until years later, many years later.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Anything else?
one funny story.
Oh, is this the side story that you talked about earlier?
Well, no, this is not that side story, but this is
Well,
a
let's hear
fun.
them both.
Okay, we'll hear both. All right, so there's I was the aircraft commander and I was down south flying out of Tan An at night, and we had just finished dropping off our patients. And we were flying back to Tan An, and so the crew in the back have really have long mic cords. So they're connected with the helmets and they're on 50-foot cords. So they're really, really long. So they could go out and still remain with communication with the helicopter and still be out there at 30 feet picking up a patient. So these crew guys were on in their 50-foot mic cord. And so we're flying back, and I've forgotten if the medic or crew chief, I can't remember who it was. And he says, "Mr. Petersen," I said, "Yeah, I got to take a crap." "Well, we'll be back there about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. "No, now. I have to take a crap now. There's no place for me to land, Mr. Petersen. I have to crap now." So I landed on this little tiny road outside of a village. I had no idea if there was VC in this village or not. And so whoever it was that needed to take this crap runs out on this 50-foot mic cord, and he's taking this dump out in a rice paddy somewhere, I don't know. And he's telling the other guy that's in the helicopter he needs more 4x4 gauze to clean himself up with. And he says, "Bring me some more 4x4." He says, and the guy in the helicopter says, "BS, I ain't getting out of this helicopter." And so it was just, it was a funny story. It cracked me up, and we lived to tell about it. But I don't remember who those guys are, even just to bring it up. But it was one of the funny stories. Now
Even if
back,
you knew who they were, I don't think we'd mention their names.
no, it would probably be inadvisable. So the other thing, the other story that I'll mention is, so this hoist mission that I had done, that I got shot down, did the TEDx talk and so forth anyway. So that mission itself. So my wife and I were just either dating or recently married, and we had to go up into New England somewhere for a wedding for a cousin's wedding. And so we were up there, and we were having this sit down dinner, and across the table from me was this guy. It looked like Rob Reiner from All in the Family, looked just like that guy. And so we were just chatting, and he said, "Oh, so we talked about Vietnam." And he says, "Yeah," he says, blah, blah. So we started, and he said something. I said, "Yeah, we had a Dustoff come in and to do a hoist." Well, long story short, he wasn't the injured guy, but he was in the unit there on the ground that I did that extraction for. So he was there because we were talking about he would say something, and then I would say something, and he would agree. So we were sharing these facts. So there was no doubt in my mind that he was on the ground for the unit that I was going to do that mission for.
Amazing.
I mean, incredibly small world.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but I mean, that begs another question, which is, it must have been extremely rare, if ever, that you dropped somebody off at a medical facility and ever found out what happened to that guy. In this case, you ran into one of the people from his unit. He might have been able to tell you what happened to that patient.
Could have, yeah.
Did he?
I don't know. I don't recall him doing it.
I see.
But yeah, we never knew anything about patients in the back. Hey, did you ever pick up so and so?
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. That's interesting.
Two side stories there.